On June 25, 2009, the world was stunned by news that seemed almost impossible to believe. Michael Jackson, the king of pop, had died at just 50 years old. The announcement came suddenly, leaving fans, celebrities, friends, and even people who had never met him struggling to process what had happened. Reports revealed that Jackson had suffered cardiac arrest at his Los Angeles home and was not breathing when paramedics arrived. Within hours, the story had spread around the world. Television networks interrupted regular programming. Fans gathered in the streets, and celebrities who had known Michael personally began speaking publicly about the loss. For many of them, the first emotion wasn't sadness. It was disbelief. Madonna was in London preparing for her own tour when she heard the news. Michael had been preparing for his comeback performances in the same city, making the timing especially painful. She later reflected on how strange it felt to realize that someone who had once been celebrated as one of the greatest entertainers alive had also spent years being criticized and ridiculed. Madonna questioned whether the world had failed Michael by focusing so much on controversy that people forgot the extraordinary artist behind the headlines. She remembered watching old performances online after his death and being reminded just how unique he really was. To her, there was simply nobody comparable to Michael Jackson. He wasn't only a superstar, he was an original. And although he had become known as the king of pop, Madonna emphasized something equally important. He was also a human being. For Whitney Houston, the loss was deeply personal. She had known Michael and the Jackson family for many years, and when she first heard that he was dead, she couldn't accept it. Her immediate reaction was essentially disbelief. She remembered Michael as someone unlike anyone else she had ever known. The news wasn't simply about losing a famous performer. It was losing someone whose presence had been part of her life for decades. Smokey Robinson experienced a similar shock. He was looking at properties when his wife called him, crying so hard that he could barely understand what she was saying. Then came the words he never expected to hear. Michael Jackson was dead. Smokey couldn't believe it. Michael was only 50. To someone who had known him since childhood, the idea that he could suddenly be gone seemed almost impossible. The realization eventually overwhelmed him, and he broke down in tears. For Quincy Jones, the loss was perhaps even more difficult to comprehend. Quincy had worked with Michael during one of the most important periods of his career. Together, they created music that would define an era. Their relationship had grown beyond the traditional boundaries of producer and artist. There was a deep personal connection between them. Quincy was 76 when Michael died. Michael was only 50. Quincy admitted that he was in a state of denial because he couldn't understand how Michael could be gone before him. He described missing Michael like a younger brother. For Quincy, the loss wasn't simply the death of one of the world's greatest entertainers. It was the loss of someone with whom he believed his soul had been connected. Beyoncé also understood exactly how powerful Michael's influence had been. She had watched him from childhood and considered him one of the people who inspired her to become a performer. During her 2009 world tour, she paid tribute to him on stage. She remembered the first time she saw Michael perform and described experiencing the magic of someone who had helped shape her own dreams. Her tribute showed how Michael's influence had traveled from one generation of performers to another. Chris Brown carried a similar connection. He had grown up watching Michael and absorbing his dancing, stage presence, and style. Nearly a year after Michael's death, Chris performed a tribute at the BET Awards. At first, he appeared completely in control. He recreated some of Michael's iconic movements and celebrated the performer who had influenced him. But when the performance reached Man in the Mirror, the emotion became overwhelming. Chris struggled to continue singing. The tribute had suddenly become something deeply personal. Jay-Z approached Michael's death from a different perspective. Rather than allowing the moment to become only about mourning, he encouraged people to celebrate Michael's life. His message was simple. People should appreciate those they love while they are still alive. Michael had spent decades creating memories for millions of people. But Jay-Z believed those memories would have meant even more if Michael himself had been alive to witness how deeply people appreciated him. That idea became one of the most powerful lessons surrounding Michael's death. Don't wait until someone is gone to tell them what they mean to you. Usher also spoke about the enormous influence Michael had on an entire generation. For Usher, Michael wasn't merely someone he watched on television. He had met him, he had known him personally, and he had even shared the stage with him. That made the loss especially painful. Usher explained that it was almost impossible to become a major performer in the modern era without being influenced by Michael Jackson. Michael had changed what people expected from entertainers. He wasn't simply a singer. He was a dancer, performer, storyteller, and visual artist. Justin Timberlake understood that impact firsthand as well. He had memories of Michael both on stage and away from the spotlight. But Justin also understood why Michael's death affected people who had never met him. Michael's music had become connected to people's memories. A song could instantly transport someone back to a particular moment in their childhood. A music video could remind someone of where they were when they first saw it. A performance could become part of someone's identity. That's why Michael's death felt strangely personal to millions. Justin believed Michael had opened people's minds through his music and performances. Few entertainers had ever been able to accomplish something like that. Michael didn't simply perform songs. He presented them in ways audiences had never seen before. For Justin, there was no easy comparison. Michael had created something almost impossible to duplicate. His influence was untouchable. Even former President Barack Obama commented on Michael's passing. Obama acknowledged that Michael Jackson would go down in history as one of the greatest entertainers ever. He had grown up listening to Michael's music and still had his songs with him. Obama also recognized that Michael's personal life had been complicated and often painful. But he believed that history would ultimately remember the joy Michael brought to millions through his extraordinary talent. That distinction became important in the days following his death. The headlines surrounding Michael's personal life had often dominated public discussion. But after his passing, many people began returning to the music. They remembered the performer, the dancer, the songwriter, the entertainer who had changed popular culture. Celine Dion was one of the celebrities who struggled to accept the news while it was still fresh. When she appeared on television only hours after Michael's death, she admitted that the reality hadn't fully sunk in. She had admired Michael since childhood. To her, he had been an idol long before she became a superstar herself. The tragedy was simply too enormous to process immediately. Other celebrities experienced the same surreal feeling. Some had known Michael personally. Others had only encountered him through his music. Yet nearly everyone described the same strange realization. It was difficult to imagine a world without Michael Jackson. Even people who hadn't known him well felt as though they had lost someone familiar. One celebrity explained that Michael had existed throughout his entire life. His music was everywhere. His videos were everywhere. His influence was everywhere. So imagining that Michael would no longer be part of the living world felt almost unreal. For the Jackson family, however, there was nothing abstract about the loss. Michael wasn't the king of pop. He was their brother. LaToya Jackson remembered receiving a call from her father telling her that Michael was sick and that she needed to get to him. At first, she didn't understand the seriousness of the situation. Then she was told to go directly to the hospital. She rushed there, desperately trying to find out what was happening. Nobody wanted to give her a clear answer. She kept asking whether Michael was okay. Then her mother came onto the phone. The words she heard changed everything. Michael was dead. LaToya described the moment as devastating. She was so overwhelmed that she struggled to continue driving. Her legs became weak, and she began crying. The reality that her brother was gone was almost impossible to accept. For Jermaine Jackson, the pain was just as devastating. He remembered hearing his mother say that Michael had died. The tone of her voice was something he could never forget. He immediately rushed across town. As he approached the hospital, he could see helicopters in the sky and knew that was where Michael was. He first went to comfort his mother, but he also needed to see his brother. When he finally saw Michael lying there lifeless, the reality became unavoidable. This was no longer a shocking news report. This was his brother. The king of pop was gone. Brooke Shields remembered another side of Michael. Millions of people knew the superstar who could command an entire stadium. Brooke knew the person behind that image. At Michael's memorial, she spoke about the qualities that made him special to those who were close to him. She remembered him as caring, funny, honest, and deeply connected to life. She remembered someone who cared about his family, his friends, and his fans. Her tribute wasn't simply about Michael Jackson, the celebrity. It was about Michael, the person. And as she continued speaking, the emotion became increasingly difficult to contain. She eventually encouraged everyone to look upward and smile. Because despite the heartbreak, she wanted people to remember the joy Michael had brought into their lives. But perhaps the most emotional moment came from someone who knew Michael in a completely different way. His daughter, Paris Jackson. 12 days after Michael's death, his family gathered for his memorial. Michael had spent years protecting his children from the intense attention surrounding his fame. Because of that, the public rarely heard them speak. But during the memorial, Paris unexpectedly walked toward the microphone. She was only 11 years old. Standing in front of a massive audience, she tried to put into words what her father meant to her. She didn't talk about album sales. She didn't talk about awards. She didn't talk about his fame. She talked about being his daughter. She described Michael as the best father anyone could imagine. Then, through tears, she simply said that she loved him.